Hey guys, my name is Philip and this is part 4 to the Sawhorse build videos. Make sure you check out part 1, 2 and 3. I think where we left off in part 3, we got all our mortising done. So now we're going to focus on the tenons. So I'm going to go ahead, use my plans, lay out the tenons and go to the sled and basically do the shouldering on the sled. And then we're going to go ahead to the bandsaw with a shim, and I'll explain why I like using that method to drop the cheeks and make the tenon thickness. All right. Okay, so I've got my legs. I'm going to go ahead and take care of these tenons first. The tenon goes on the bottom of the leg, so obviously make sure you're doing it at the right end. And this tenon is going to go into the foot. So just looking here, it says it's 2 7/8 wide by 1 3/4 long. So I'm just going to mark one of these. It's not the right pencil. All right. 1 3/4. There's no need to mark all of them. I'm going to go to the table saw, set up a stop, but I'll go ahead and I'll mark this guy out and just transfer that edge along that mark on the edge. All right, so that's all I need for that. Now I need to figure out, well, where does this tenon go in this actual piece of wood? So we know it needs to be a 1/2 inch thick tenon, since we did 1/2 inch mortises, and I've got 2 7/8 inch wide of a tenon. So I'm going to go ahead and just look at this. So it's 3 1/4 inch and 2 7/8. That's 3/8 divided by 2. So basically from the edge, I need to step in 3/16, 3/16. And then this guy is 7/8 inch thick. 1/2 inch, so that again, that's 4, 5, 6, 7, that's 3/8 divided by 2. So I need to step in 3/16 and 3/16. I'll just lay this out on one, and it's important because when I go to the table saw, I need to know how high off the sled that the blade needs to be. This is real simple. I kept it simple. It's 3/16 all the way around. So let me just mark it with this guy. All right. You can also use a marking gauge. I used to use a marking gauge a lot, but I'm not going to cut this by hand. But you know, each to their own. I just need a reference mark for now. All right, so let's just go ahead and double check that. I'm going to pinch a couple inches. Yeah, that looks good. All right, that looks good. So just on one of them, this will be the one I'll set up, and then the rest will just follow along. It really helps too, especially if you've got a lot of different heights. Like in this case, it's all 3/8. But usually I'll go ahead and write on here, you know, 3/8. And if this is a 1/2, I'll put a 1/2. I'll put those marks on there. So when I go to the saw and I say, okay, I'm setting up for 3/8, I quickly know which one needs to go down. I don't have to be over there guessing what's what. So I've got this ready. There's no need for this. Let's go to the sled. Okay, so like I said, I'm going to do the shouldering on the table saw. Initially, we figured out, well, how high does this blade need to be? It's 3/16. So, you know, many ways to do that. You can have gauges and stuff. Real simple, scrap piece of wood. And if I have multiple depths that I need to do, I'll lay it out on that piece of wood and then just bring it to the blade and lower it until it's to that mark. When I do this, 3/16 is ideal. I usually go like a 64th over. And what that means is when I do all this shouldering and drop the tenon cheeks, I have this little saw curve all the way around where I don't have to go in with a chisel and clean up that last bit. Makes a big difference when you have a lot of tenons, and it doesn't jeopardize the integrity of the tenon, as long as you don't go too far. All right, so I just have a regular blade on here, you know, a flat bottom blade. I think I say that a lot of times in my videos. Would be nice to put on this. It doesn't make that big of a difference. So I'm just gonna kind of move this, slide this back and forth. All right. Then I'll go ahead and I'll use this too for my stop. So I said to set the length. I said 1 3/4. Let's go ahead, mark 1 3/4. Lay this down, and on my stop, I don't know if you can see that. Let me take this off real quick. I have a little dome screw head on here, and I find that really helps when you're doing shouldering. A lot of difficult with when you do shouldering is that last cut you do, it's off just a fraction. Now, there's a bunch of variables that's going on. If the initial cut on this isn't square, if your sled isn't set up right, and what I find too is having that off a little bit and your sled may not be spot on, and then you're going to a stop without going to a point. At one part you're going to hit it low, and then when you flip it up you're going to hit it high, and it could end up hitting really up here instead of down here. So this little guy I find helps quite a bit. So let's go ahead and set the length. Let's see, got my little mark on the very bottom edge. You can bring this forward to the tooth that's pointing to the waist side. Actually, sorry, it's going to be pointing that way. So it looks good. And now I call this an outboard stop. A lot of times in projects, you can have the same tenon length. So in this case, 1 3/4. You could have a project that has 4 different length rails, but what's the same is that it's 1/2 inch thick and it's 1 3/4 in length. So if I were to reference this from the other end, I'm going to have to keep moving this back and forth, and it's not very accurate. So since this measurement doesn't change, I just set it up as an outboard stop where I'm going to this every time. No matter the length of the rail, it's not going to make a difference. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead, where my mark, put that down and just make a quick cut and make sure I got the right height. So that looks perfect. I'm just kissing the line, just a little above the line, and that's what I want. So yeah, time to just knock them out. When I go ahead and do this, what you're going to notice is I'm going to cut all the way through, and then as I'm exiting the blade, I'm just going to very carefully reach over and push it out of the way and then come back. The reason I do that is I don't want to double cut it. A lot of times you'll notice you go through, you hear one cut, you come back and you hear it kissing it again, and that can really mess up the integrity of that line. And what's really important here is this line is super crisp, because that's what you're going to see. So be sure if you do this, and sometimes I can't do it, sometimes I have to back up, but you need to be real methodical about how you use your sled. This sled's pretty tight. There's a little bit of give, just enough to let it move, but you don't want to ever be on one side or the other, and that's especially what happens. Someone push through this way, it's doing this to the sled, then they pull back and it does this to the sled, and then their lines are all messed up. So when you do it, just be real careful. You're going to go all the way through. Be aware the blade's exposed right here, and make sure you've gone all the way through, so that when you push this out of the way, you're not going to hit the blade. So, just be careful when you do it, but you'll get a much better result if you do this way. Okay, so there it is. I'll go ahead and knock the others out. You don't need to watch that, but nice and clean all the way through. And I didn't even check, hopefully it's right, I didn't check the length. So I needed 1 3/4 to the shoulder. Yeah, that's good. Simple. Okay, so now, like I said, I'm going to use this method. It's called a bandsaw tenon, and I just want to explain why it works really well. So a lot of times when I teach this, a lot of students just say, well, how come you don't just go to the bandsaw, set it up to the line, do a cut, flip it, do another cut? That's fine, and that can absolutely work. The reason, and one, like as a teacher, it doesn't work because I have multiple students that all mill their own stuff separately. It's never the same. So if this changes at all, the thickness of this, you're going to have to keep moving this around. So it's not very efficient. And the reason I don't do it in my job, A lot of times it's kind of like the Outboard Stop. It's been consistent about things. A lot of time in any given job, the mortise is the same. The tenon is the same as far as like it's a 1/2 inch. That doesn't change, but what does change is the offset. So in some cases, you know, this is 3/16 offset from the face. It could be a 1/2 inch on another rail, but it's still that same 1/2 inch tenon. So doing the shim technique, you have to move it one time, and then you use the shim, and every single time you do it, you're going to get that nice fit, that 1/2 inch. You'll never have to readjust that. And then if you need to, you know, move the fence for a different offset, you move it, but then you use the shim again, and it delivers again and again a 1/2 inch wide tenon. So back up a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and make that shim. So a few things you need to know. One, well, how, you know, wide, I guess thick the tenon is, how wide the mortise is. So it's a 1/2 inch. We use the 1/2 inch bit. So I've got that, and now I need to know, okay, what's the curve of my bandsaw blade? Typically it's a 1/16, but I'm just going to go ahead and check real quick. All right. So yeah, a 1/16, that really doesn't change too much. So basically this shim, this is going to be my shim. I'll go join and plane it down, but the thickness that this has to be is 1/2 inch plus the curve. So that's 9/16. So we're going to go to the joiner, join it flat, plane it until I get 9/16. We'll do a little test, and if I need to make any adjustment, I can use blue tape or maybe send it for the plane a little bit more. But once I have that shim, put a hole in it, write 1/2 inch on it, and hang it up on the wall, and it'll work pretty much, you know, time after time. All right. Okay, so I've got my shim. I've already did a test cut. I'm going to go ahead and do another test cut just to show you what I'm looking for. But I added 2 pieces of blue tape, about 4/1000ths of an inch, to get the fit that I want. So I'll go ahead, do the test, show you what I'm looking for when I have a mortise, the type of fit I'm looking for. All right, so just a quick test. Get my mortise. Yeah, so, I mean, it should be able to hold itself. You know, there's always a debate. If it's too tight, you're going to starve the joint. And what I usually tell people, and same with my students, is what I'm teaching and showing is basically what I've learned through mentors. And, you know, my last mentor for 7 years was a furniture maker for 25 years. I worked for him for 7 years as an apprentice. And this is how he taught it to me. And he hasn't had a piece of furniture come apart yet. So each to their own. I'm not going to argue, you know, which is better, but this is what I'm looking for. So nice, snug. I know that's not going to come apart. All right, so we know that it fits. So now I need to set up the first cut where this is going to go, and I'll be consistent. So here's my face. I always have my face in. Again, if I don't get this dead center, it shouldn't hurt anything because I'm always referencing off one face. It'll be symmetrical in the horses itself. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so 3/16. I said that. All right, I've got to think about it. Always do this wrong the first time. So I'm basically looking for the tooth that's pointing in, and I'm going to set it right onto that line. That looks pretty good. And then let's see, so if I make that cut and then put the shim, it steps me out. That gives me the 1/2 inch tenon. So I'm going to go ahead, test it. I'm just going to run it in, just nick the end, and see how it looks, make any adjustment if needed. So you should be able to just eyeball it, but that looks pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and just take care of it. Now, I will say, if you had a lot of these to do, you can set a stop on the outside that basically stops this cut before it ends up hitting into the actual shoulder itself. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to be careful. I usually leave my hand back here and use it as a leverage. Once you get close to cutting this cheek off, you need to slow down, because what ends up happening, you're just cruising through and it gets towards the end and it just jumps in and hits it. If you hit it, you're going to see it. You're going to have this little saw curve right where the shoulder meets the foot. So just take your time. My face is going in. I'm going to go ahead and pick these parts, face in. That way I don't have to think. So there it is. What's left to do on this is just to take care of the width, and that can be done as a flip-flop. You know, another little point, you see my piece got stuck. If you had a 0 clearance here, that wouldn't happen. And you could also get into the habit of where you don't quite cut all the way through, but close enough, you could put it out with it still intact and then just peel it off. Okay, so the last thing I need to do is take this to final width. This is the first one I had laid out, 2 7/8. So I'm just going to set up the bandsaw to where I'm doing this outer side one so the bit drops off, instead of doing it to the inside where it gets pinched up against the fence and possibly, you know, thrown into the throat. So this will be a flip-flop. I'll cut it, flip it, cut it. Go ahead and load this guy. Any chance you get, keep this. What the? We'll fix that later. Any chance you get, just keep this down as low as you can. It's gonna, you know, be safer and. All right, there you go. Safer, and it also, you know, will give you a better cut, especially with, you know, resawing, but less flex in the blade. You know, the further this is up, the more it's going to flex. All right, so got our tenons done, came out nice, and now it's time to turn this square tenon into a round one to fit the round hole. So we're gonna go over to the router table. This is a 1/2 inch, so we're gonna use a 1/4 inch radius bit, set it up in a little auxiliary fence, and basically take care of the majority of this to where we now have a guide to finish it off by a chisel. Okay, so now I've brought the tenons over to the table, router table, and I have a 1/4 inch radius bit already in there. And basically what we're doing is we're going to reference it off the edge. We're going to put a quarter radius that gives us this 1/2 inch that should fit into our actual mortise. So I'm going to go ahead and set that up. A couple things you need to know. You need some type of auxiliary fence. It tends to work better definitely if your offsets are different, but you basically need to raise this up to where that radius, the very tip, bottom tip, just starts with the surface of this. So real quick before I do this, I'll just explain what's going on. So when you go to do this, you know, you can lay it down, come in and do that. But the problem is when you come to the other side to do it, you've already created this round over. So when you flip it over, the bearing starts following that round over, and you end up with like this type situation, instead of like a nice, you know, 1/2 inch, it's got this little step. So it's, you know, not as easy to balance, but if you do it this way and this way, the bearing's always riding on this broad surface, so it doesn't do that little step thing. So now, they're starting to look a little more like it. Let's just check it real quick. If I need to make any adjustments, sometimes I'll go back to the bandsaw, you know, buzz it, come back here and route it again. Yeah, so maybe, well, that's pretty good, pretty tight, but by the time I go to my bench, finish off that the rest of that round over with my chisel, a little bit of sandpaper, it should be pretty quick and get it done. You really don't want to spend a ton of time fitting every single tenon, and they should all fit pretty much with any mortise, and that way it's just more efficient. So that's it. Okay, so now we went ahead on the router table and we took care of this round over, but obviously it leaves about a 1/2 inch to the shoulder. But what's really nice on this, especially in this case where this is a pretty long tenon, it gives me a nice guide. So now I'm just going to take my chisel right along this part I've already created to finish it off, do any work I need to do on the side, a little sanding and check the fit, and basically just get this part done. So, you know, one thing I didn't mention, or a couple things I guess, it's really important to pick the correct chisel. This is about a 1/2 inch, but as I'm going back, it's not expanding, or it's not getting in the way of these shoulders. What I've noticed, you get a 1-inch chisel and you're banging into this without knowing, you're putting these little dents in the shoulder. And again, that's what's going to be seen on this. So pick the right size chisel. And, you know, be very careful. I'm keeping it flat on here and riding it. My hand's out of the way. I'm guiding it with my thumb. Never put your hand in front of the chisel. And this way, you're less likely to end up with this like weird dovetail looking tenon. So just real easy. Take your time. This part you should enjoy. Put some good music on. All right. So now I've got some 120 sandpaper. I'm just going to go ahead and rip about 1.5 inch strip. And again, doing this, be aware of the shoulders always. You know, you start getting into this and you just start cutting into the actual shoulders. It won't look very good. So let's go ahead, see how we did. All right, that looks good. That's good. I didn't check the length. Let's see if we got lucky. All right. So there it is. The shoulder looks nice and tight all the way around, and that's without a clamp. And that sucker's not coming apart. Okay, so this is video 4, where we took care of the tenons. Now, I just focused on the tenon in the foot. You're just going to repeat the same process. Nothing really is that different for the through tenons, except for the fact that it's a through tenon. So video 5, I'm going to show you how to basically make, split the tenons and how to make a very simple jig on the bandsaw to make some wedges for those tenons. Now be sure to check out the other videos, 1, 2, and 3, and watch them all. Probably make a little more sense that way. Cheers, appreciate it.